The Henry N. Jackson School of International Studies at the University of Washington presents World Focus, a continuing series on international political, social, economic, and cultural issues.
The lectures you are about to see are the 9th in the Stroum Lectureship in Jewish Studies, a series which has brought outstanding scholars to the University of Washington over the past decade. 2 of the series have been published and won international recognition as original contributions to scholarship. They are Yehuda Bauer's The Holocaust in Historical Perspective and Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi's Zachor, winner of the National Jewish Book Award for work in history. This year's lecturer, Aharon Appelfeld, was born in Czernowitz, Bukovina. In the Nazi sweep east, his mother was killed and he was transported to the labor camp at Transnistria, from which he soon escaped. He was 8 years old. For the next 3 years, he wandered the forests, keeping what he calls the sweet secret of his Jewishness. Sometime in 1944, he was picked up by the Red Army, served in field kitchens in the Ukraine, and after the war made his way to Italy. In 1946, he emigrated to Palestine. Though he only learned Hebrew at that point in his life, he now writes exclusively in Hebrew and is known as one of its distinctive stylists. A professor of Hebrew literature at Ben Gurion University in Beersheba, his published works include 6 collections of stories, a book of essays, and 7 novels, of which 4, Badenheim 1939, The Age of Wonders, Tzili, The Story of a Life, and The Retreat have been translated into English. He has been described by Irving Howe as one of the best novelists alive, and his works have been hailed as magical, beautifully composed and profoundly moving, elegant, resonant, and deeply disturbing. In 1983, Professor Appelfeld was honored with the Israel Prize for Literature, and in 1984, he was honored with a nomination for the Nobel Prize in Literature. Professor Appelfeld spoke movingly, indeed hauntingly, of his own experiences and how, as a novelist, he came to portray his remembrances of things past. His visit to the University of Washington as Stroum Lecturer in Jewish Studies was a memorable event. Those present sat in silence as Professor Appelfeld spoke of writing about the Holocaust, a novelist's reflections. As several members of the audience said to me after the lectures, we had the feeling of being in the presence of greatness. I can only agree.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I am going to deliver a very personal talk. I am aware that personal language tends to confuse both he who attests and he who hears the testimony. As for myself, I still believe that every true spiritual concern must be expressed through a personal prism. I will attempt to describe several experiences which shaped me and my generation. Not by way of chronicle shall I speak, but by way of those scenes and those events which worked upon us as upon malleable matter. At the outbreak of the Second World War, we were 8 years old, our parents about 30. What did we manage to accumulate during those few comparatively tranquil years before the war. Nothing, so it would seem, but nonetheless everything. First of all, there were our large families. Through family, we knew towns and villages, meager shops and large businesses. The family is, after all, Jewish history in miniature. In the family, you could find the last of the believers and those whose belief was by rote. There were those who slipped away from tradition and those who consciously estranged themselves, those who converted for their own convenience and those who converted spitefully. All the phenomena of the past 100 years were represented there. Anarchists, communists, Bundists, Zionists. The more extensive the family, the more intense the contrasts represented within it. I was born in a town named Czernowitz. Until the First World War, it was a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A very Jewish town and a very assimilated too. In my home, for instance, it was forbidden to speak Yiddish. My parents admired the German language. For them, it was more than a language. It was a culture. Once or twice a year, we went to synagogue, mainly because our grandfathers. It was not our wish to go there, but we went to fulfill a small obligation. At the outbreak of the Second World War, as I mentioned, I was 8 years old. I still remember the beautiful streets, the river, the park that tended to imitate Vienna. We were surrounded by Jews who still were Jews, but we hated them, or perhaps I should say despised them. I still remember my parents saying, "Be quiet, don't behave like so-and-so." No, I know. It was also painful to them. To deny your identity is a painful matter. But this was the way of the assimilated Jew. They were great believers. They were believers in progress in humanity. Their denial of their Jewishness was a kind of belief. For my generation, assimilation was no longer a quest, but if one may speak in such terms, a way of life. True, some displaced remnants of Jewish life still existed, but they were devoid of life. Middle-class Jewry considered its sons to be liberated from the ancient tradition and as potential candidates for the business world, medicine, law, and engineering. The benefit we could bring to ourselves was bound up with the benefit we could bring to society. There, as now, the middle-class Jew had no significant place in its life for Jewishness. Jewishness was considered to be an anachronism, something difficult to get rid of, which warranted a small corner of one's life. The grandfathers still maintained religious practice, but to inspire us with their belief was beyond them. With their own eyes, they saw the walls around them collapse, but they did not believe that they could change anything. Their sadness, if I understood it correctly, was not that of the old, but of the defeated. No longer were there any polemics or any attempt to present arguments, but a sad resignation. They were also angry grandfathers, but they stirred up what already existed in the partially assimilated Jew, hatred towards our heritage. The assimilated Jew was a believer. His belief made him partially blind. His concepts of life were mainly in abstracts: humanity, progress, beauty, the benefit we could bring to society. He could not imagine that such concepts will arouse hatred, brutality. The assimilated Jew was a naive person, blind to the demons which surrounded him, and he saw them, he denied them. He accused himself. Our old grandfathers knew of these demons by instinct, but it was beyond them to convey to us the message, to save us. We were blind. The sudden Holocaust pressed us into the depths of suffering without distinguishing between the believer and the estranged. Perhaps for us, the children, it was easier. Our suffering was mainly physical and did not involve any soul searching. For our parents, it was the end of their world. Everything they believed in was suddenly destroyed. All they had left was their naked Jewishness. The Jewish secret, which no longer existed, or else flickered so dimly, suddenly exacted both emotion and judgment. The accusation was clear, but unbelievable. You are Jewish because your mother and your grandmother were Jewish. It does not matter if you are a believer or a estranged, a convert or a communist. The Jewish blood in your body condemns you. You are a danger by your very existence. You are deserving of death. It was like in the trial of Kafka, beyond rational arguments. The assimilated Jew is a rationalist by nature. He denies mystics, demons, superstitions. His view of life, if generalization is permitted, is built up clearly, somewhere uprooted and beyond reality, but steadily and reasonably. Suddenly he was pressed into a world where reason no longer existed. The reactions were many and variegated. Accusation against others and against oneself. Renewed identification and keen aloofness. This suffering was not our fate. We were affected by it indirectly. And since we wavered for years along that thin line between life and death, we internalized our parents' torments, not through their direct speech, but through their dumb bodily gestures which were wrapped up with hunger and guilt, with cold and self-hatred. Again, it was like in Kafka's trial. The spiritual suffering was no less than the physical. When the day arrived, when we sought to clarify for ourselves what was really said to us during those bitter moments, we did not know what had been demanded of us. Our parents could not save themselves. Saving our lives was their main concern. There were no bounds to the extent of which they were willing to endanger themselves. We were the meaning in their lives. Even then, while making our escape, when we saw how they jeopardized their lives while seeking a safe place for us, we knew that in this impairment, on the edge of death, they were not only commanding to us life, but handing over to us the very meaning of their lives. At every instant, we struggle to understand that meaning. True, we have changed probably. The way of the assimilated Jews no more our pattern of life. But the pain and dissolution of our parents still flow within us. Has the suffering brought us back to Jewishness? Right after the war, on the open Italian beaches, we were housed in barracks set up by the Joint Distribution Committee. It was evening. The dim corridor light reflected upon us and our confused existence. After the liberation, a boy said suddenly that from now on he will be a communist. His parents were communists and he wanted to follow in their way. It was his obligation. Others spoke of their desires. Words from the old vocabulary were resurrected. The first buds of consciousness germinated. Here we come to realization that the words we inherited from our parents still float within us. On that same desolate beach, there were children who escaped from Poland. To our surprise, they still clung to the old belief. They joined the Jews who gathered in the evening for prayer. At times, you could see a boy in solitary prayer. To us, this seemed wondrous, something we could never attain. But returning to our earlier memories, to our parents' word, the word of the Jewish intellectuals between the wars. Their religion consisted of universalist beliefs, and it expressed itself in politics, literature, and music. They did not say much about Jewishness, and what they did say hardly kindled a spark in our soul. If expressions associated with repulsion are now recalled, they had to do with Jews, with Jewish religion. Because the tone of this expression was dissonant, they still cling to our memories. Years passed until we understood that our parents too were seeking a path to their own being. Everything was suddenly destroyed. First we were thrown into ghettos, then the railway station, and that awful crush and great hunger, words vanished and thought was silenced. Then the camps, the barracks, the blue sky of winter, naked faces and eyes in which death flickered. It was beyond us. Suddenly you escaped. How have you managed to escape? Where were your parents when you escaped? And why you? This bare and simple question will torture you all your life. From there on, loneliness was our lot. It was either the forest or the monastery or a tyrannical farmer who treated you like one of his animals. We soon learned to keep our Jewishness a secret. By instinct, we knew that the deeper we concealed it, the greater our chances were to survival. Some were lucky. And so, without parents, wandering in strange fields, among alien and hostile Gentiles, we grew as animals grow in obeisance. We were drawn along by instinct and guided by it. In the alien forests and villages, we felt the secret of our Jewishness. It was a sweet secret, like the smell of snow which draws you slowly to the edge of death. We knew that because of that secret, we were fair game for every axe and rifle. But without it, our existence would have been even less. In the forests, it seems, a hard knot was tied between us and the thin flame of our Jewishness. The Jewish secret became the only warmth in our misery, our shelter. There we cherished thoughts of home, parents. At times, this shelter was life's final resource. And so, fate supplied a precautious and harsh entry into both our inner consciousness and the world of our parents. Our parents were suddenly taken from us, leaving us in a hostile environment, raw nature and Gentiles. Our Jewishness was far away from any social metrics. We learned Jewishness through our bodies. For years, our bodies were in danger because our bodies were a target for all kinds of brutal and violent intentions. Our very existence became a secret. It was not that our homes had not had an influence on us. But what came afterwards was so powerful and so brutal that all traces of this influence were erased. All along, we knew that our Jewishness was not only to be kept secret, but it was also a catastrophe. There were moments when we despised our fate, the fate of the persecuted innocents. In moments of weakness, we turned our back on it. Our childhood in assimilated homes, followed by camps, forests, hostile environment, fashioned us as Jews. It is a wave of memories, revulsions, guilt feelings, and obligations that we never dared examine in depth. It is hatred and love which are inseparably bound together. It shows, of course, our suspicion of generalizations and ideologies, attempt to provide simplistic answers for complexities. A lot of false and fabricated theories have been invented mainly in the theological field. This has to be said. Jewish religion had been awakened before the Holocaust. I know that life at times requires a guiding word, at what we call a lesson. I prefer living the entire complexity. In other words, you cannot deny any level of your experience. The years of suffering passed, and in 1944, the Soviet armies liberated us. We were 12 years old. The long war years had left their mark on our faces, our bodies, our movements, even more so on the way we felt and the way we thought. First of all, suspicion and complete lack of trust from the most innocent object to any person. The enemy lurked everywhere. You had to watch out. Some of us were completely dominated by this feeling. The war years shaped the movements of a boy, I remember, in such a way that he moved slickly like an alert animal. He would not touch anything before peering at it at length. Surely, this is the way people acted after the flood. Those were the feelings. Skepticism grew out of them. Our parents' belief in human and social progress was gone with them. The norms of good and bad, the cultured and primitive, the human and the inhuman. We had seen too many demons to give ourselves to this or that belief. In 1946, we came to Israel. We were 14 years old. What could we boys of 14 do with so many memories of death? Relate to them, live them. We learned to keep quiet. The experience was too great for us. The soul was incapable of assimilating so many scenes. Great catastrophes left us dumb. We were full, an oppressive fullness beyond meaning. Many of us turned to business, entertainment, studies, all kinds of activities, but no one dared to look into himself. The attempt to understand, to give expression, to form, seemed not only impossible, but even pretentious. To be silent, to maintain an inner silence, that would have been the best. That was but a fleeting wish, of course. The desire to say something never left us, even in our darkest moments. But what we were able to say came out of us in a stutter. Worse, they were words of the old vocabulary. I turned to literature. Why have I turned to literature? Probably to open the darkness and chaos within me. A deep desire to break up the old vocabulary, to say something of my experience. Many dangers lurked in my way. Modern Hebrew literature, created by our native writers, could not help me. It was a fresh and naive literature that fitted very well the heroic time of Israel's War of Independence. Again, I realized that my soul was not capable of accepting the normal as a norm, consciously or otherwise. We had a different norm, an apocalyptic one. Then came years of struggle, years to seek words and rhythm that would fit my experience. And when the new words were not born. Help came to me from an unexpected source. It came from a man who had not experienced the Holocaust, but who had already foreseen the horrors during the calm days of the declining Habsburg monarchy, the Jew Franz Kafka. I but glanced at the pages of the trial, and the feeling that he had been with us in our anguish never left me. In Kafka's language, I found, on the one hand, suspicion and skepticism, on the other, deep yearning for meaning. The thought that I had not been alone in my experience not only eased my burden, but introduced me to the wider space of spiritual suffering. Our parents, of course, were in conflict with their heritage. We were born into that conflict. Their word, the word of the assimilated Jew, the modern Jew, if interpreted positively, was a struggle for a new form of life. It was a bitter struggle, and by denying their Jewishness, it became tragic. Their painful soul-searching was for us not only a bitter memory, but a guiding lesson. Kafka's heritage was concealed even in his diaries, where he allowed himself to speak freely. Kafka's intimate interpreters, who were also his friends, emphasize that Kafka was not only a Jew by birth, but also in his way of thinking. His metaphysical yearnings are but the expression of his Jewish inwardness. The path to his castle is but that cry from the depths for meaning. The accused car, sensitive and alert, is not man in general, but the cover for his Jewish origin. Is there any truth in this interpretation? At any rate, this is how it has been interpreted by me. At times, we imagine that only to us, who were pitched into the Holocaust from the depths of assimilation, are Kafka's twisted corridors understood. Everything dear to Kafka was dear to me. The Prague Circle, the spiritual affinity to East European Jewry, the Jewish theater, the Jewish language, Kafka's desire to settle in Israel, his revulsion at the modern Jewish petit bourgeois, his research for a spiritual Judaism. Everything in Kafka was dear to me. If Kafka gave me words, tone, rhythm, way to express myself, Jewish religion, mainly Jewish mysticism, and its Hasidic embodiment gave me fundamental concepts. When I speak of mysticism, I am not referring to its source, but to that expanse of ideas which Martin Buber and Gershon Scholem elaborated upon. If not for their labor, it is doubtful whether I would have approached this great source. Just as I felt in Kafka the deep longing of the assimilated Jew trying to get to the core of his being, I found in mysticism a religious language which was most appropriate to my experience and to my perceptions. The breaking of the vessels, the release of force of evil, the aggressive demons, the sparks demanding their redemption. We felt a close affinity to these concepts. Our conceptions of them in the beginning were very subjective, of course, but the impact remained. Were we the kind of people with a religious outlook? I doubted. Uncertainty and a sense of absurdity can sometimes lead to belief, but mainly to an individualistic, anarchistic belief. The compulsion to return to ourselves, to the source of our Jewish tradition, derived not only from the obligation placed upon us to our past experience. We felt that without Jewish knowledge, without the Jewish consciousness, and the broad meaning of the word, we shall remain on the surface of our experience. This compulsion is the driving force within us. If Kafka's vision is interpreted as a way leading to a religious sphere, then this outlook is very close to me. I have not managed to go beyond it. There were years when I thought that our experience during the Holocaust will transform us completely, but the shock was apparently too great, the wound too deep, and the tools of our consciousness too weak to bring about the transformation. After the war, a group of Jews wandered the desolate beaches of Italy. They refused to stay in the shacks and supported themselves by seasonal labor in the villages. Sleeping under a roof, surrounded by domestic objects, and going about making money seemed to them, after the Holocaust, not just absurd, but a mute agreement with the cultural illusions which called forth the demons from the depths. They preferred wandering to petit bourgeois comfort. It was a kind of protest, perhaps a hint, the kind of life which suited us best after the Holocaust. I spent a few months with them. We were wandering along the beaches, the simple food, going barefoot, sleeping under the stars, the pauses, the immersions in thought, the silence. I remember it as the afterglow of a religious experience which stays with me. On that long beach, the refugees of the Holocaust made their separate decisions. Some cut themselves off, rejecting their past. Others clung to every remnant, every trace of their Jewishness. The desire to escape, to run away from yourself and your fate, and the desire to cling to every trace were bound together. I am not judging anyone, but let this be said. He who chose to go up to Israel saw more than just the rehabilitation of the body. Thank you very much.